This is you.
Okay. Source dilemma. Forgot this one.
I guess it could have been me.
Could have been you. Anyway, so the premise is this debate between closed source and open source. All right, so what we have today, if you've been watching, you have closed source vendors, OpenAI, Microsoft, Google, Amazon coming out with their own large language models, Anthropic with Claude. These companies all have their own models. They may expose them through an API, but they are proprietary to them, and that's a classic closed source software business. There's also the opposite side of open source. This is where Meta has released Llama into open source. There's plenty of other open source tools. There's a long list of them if you're interested, especially at Hugging Face, which is a France-based company that hosts a lot of these. You're seeing lots of open source models flow through in terms of the big cloud vendors. So in Azure or in Google Cloud or AWS, they're generally allowing access to a variety of open source models. This debate is more than just, well, does somebody own it or is it open sourced? There's a lot of interesting questions around auditability, cost, quality of the model, security. Vendor lock-in is really important. And companies that are building on top of these models are in many ways making some level of path-dependent choice when choosing a model. Sometimes you can swap back and forth, but at other times really not. And the large vendors that are looking to continue their API fees where they're making a lot of their money are building in some level of path dependency where it's very hard to switch away.
These are decisions that have been made for the next 2 decades.
Yes. So we think we're experiencing sort of a Linux moment at the moment where you see a lot of open source tools getting a lot of attention. They are robust and strong. You see a lot of comparisons between the closed and open source. Those deltas in some ways are decreasing in a lot of important ways as we move from only aiming for one large general model that can do everything and focus in on a model that is specific for a specific task. Open source becomes potentially even more attractive. Because you can take an open source model and fine tune it for your specific case, and then you essentially own that. It becomes an asset for you, an AI asset, because you've built it on yourself. You can then contribute that back if that's something that it doesn't provide, have any proprietary information, etc. So it's a really interesting part of the model. We're watching for evolving standards here. We're also watching a lot of large corporates that are supporting open source. One of the key ones that's really interesting to watch, I think, is Apple, as they push out generative AI into their ecosystem. Apple has had a long history with open source. There's lots of debates about how well they've played in the open source community, but they have actually advanced quite a lot in terms of and leveraging and using that open source. There's rumors that they have their own LLM. We'll find out. But any company of that scale that adopts something is quite important. So as they we're going to watch that a lot, especially around WWDC in the summer, to see whether there's any indication of any of these open source tools that they're pushing. That makes a big difference for any enterprise that's trying to develop an application. If there's an open source tool that's been accelerated on the iPhone, that's a pretty important thing to have in your mindset as you're thinking about what models to use.